The city is a warm hand at dusk. Singapore in 1967 breathes out of its windows and coffee shops. The smell of frying garlic and engine heat and rain that might come or might not. You can hear 100 conversations if you stand still enough. Dice clattering in an alley. A radio's thin voice trying to sell a miracle soap. Two lovers arguing without raising their eyes. And beneath it all, a new sound, a rumor's soft machinery turning. Thanks for listening to Boring for Sleep. If this story helped you drift away, please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. It begins like a cough, small enough to ignore. One boy, then two, then a neighbor's cousin, all convinced that something impossible is happening to them. That their manhood is retreating into their bodies, shrinking like a frightened snail. That the line that marks them in the world is withdrawing under the skin. That death waits at the end of that retreat like a hole in the ice. These are not men given to faint imagination. They are workers, soldiers, students with pockets full of bus tickets and chalk dust. But fear is an engineer. It builds bridges between what you cannot see and what you can feel. At a clinic near the port, a doctor in a wrinkled white coat tries to reason with the tide. He has a clipboard, a pen that keeps running out, an exhaustion that makes everything shine a little at the edges. He speaks to a queue that doubles and redoubles. Drink water, rest. This is a phantom with fingerprints of panic, not a disease that eats. But the men shake their heads. Panic? How do you tell panic from the hand that is on you now, tugging? One man comes with his girlfriend. She holds him like a knot she refuses to untie. He holds himself, both hands like a clamp, as if he were plugging a leak in a ship at sea. Another arrives with a wooden clothespin clamped to his skin, face pale and triumphant. See? It's the only thing that keeps it from going in. Pain is better than vanishing. Pain is certain. A rumor breeds offspring faster than mice. They say it is the pigs. The pigs were vaccinated. The pigs are poison. The bacon is the fuse. They say a neighboring country has cursed the island with a powder you cannot see. They say a woman who laughed at her husband's fear found him cold the next morning, all gone, all tucked inside forever. The city listens with its pulse to the city's fear. Radios repeat warnings like prayers, then deny them, then repeat them again. Soy sauce becomes a sacrament. Trousers are cinched with strings like lifelines. The doctor goes home past midnight and cannot unclench his shoulders. He is not a superstitious man. He believes in charts, in the mercy of numbers. Yet, in the mirror, he finds his hands lingering where the night's performances have taught them to linger. Absurd, he says softly to the mirror. He says it again, because sometimes the first time doesn't stick. Outside, the city's courtyards glitter with clothespins like small, stubborn stars. Fear makes an excellent storyteller. And that night, fear begins the first chapter. Long before radios took their seats on kitchen shelves, long before ships moored by concrete and cranes, scholars in China wrote of a terror that arrived like winter wind, sudden, invisible, intimate. They called it by names that mingled medicine and myth, terms that spoke of withdrawal, of the body's center stealing back its gifts, of life's heat sinking. The tortoise was a favored metaphor. Its head draws inward when struck, its shell a fortress. The frightened body imitates it, head retreating, warmth receding, spirit diminishing. A physician in the Ming court composes a case note, while the lamps burn sesame oil to a sweet ache. A young man, a scholar of promising calligraphy, came to him one morning after the 9th bell, pale and breath shallow, convinced that his yang was bleeding backward into the void. The doctor listened, observed, pressed 2 fingers to a wrist. He wrote, "Pulse wiry, voice thin, fear strong." He recommended warmth, ginger, gentle reassurance, the social cure of presence. He recommended, too, a boundary for the imagination, the lattice window open to admit sun. In a village far from the court, a woman ties a red thread around her husband's waist, the knot a marriage of body and hope. Festivals pass. In the square, the opera singers paint their faces and sing of ghostly seductions, of fox spirits that drain a man to husk. The villagers nod. They know a landscape patrolled by spirits. You do not disprove a fox with a lecture. You answer it with thread, with rituals, with community, with warmth. You call back the errant breath. Centuries will pass, empires will fall. Telegraphs will sting the air with cabled words, but the curve of the fear remains the same. Something most private is becoming most public, and the border between body and story loosens. The physicians argue in their books, and yet even as they argue they admit this. The company of others steadies the pulse. The hand on the shoulder is a medicine. The bowl of broth you can taste is a medicine. Being believed, even in your error, is a medicine that keeps you from worse errors. A Qing scholar writes, "Those who are alone in winter are more afflicted. Those who are laughed at are most endangered." He does not mean metaphysics. He means that loneliness sharpens fear, and mockery poisons the well. His ink dries and black branches across the page. Outside his study, the wind moves a paper talisman on a doorframe, and the talisman clicks softly, like a caged insect. History keeps notes. It keeps them in bamboo slips and in the embarrassed memories of families. It keeps them in the way a whole town can glance at a thread around a waist and choose not to speak, which is its own kind of kindness. The doctor in the Ming court closes his case book and thinks, as doctors often do, that he is treating not only a patient, but also the story the patient is telling himself. He warms his hands over the brazier. He listens to the rain on the roof. Somewhere, a young husband sleeps at last, a red thread loose against his skin like a sunset caught on a branch. By the second week, the lines at the clinic sprayed the streets. A reporter with clever shoes and a tired smile writes a column trying to hang numbers on the wind. He is not mocking. He does not dare. He describes instead the choreography of a city that wants to be rational and cannot stop whistling past the graveyard. Pharmacies sell out of one thing and then the next, because certainty is a commodity, and it always runs out. A rumor arrives wearing the coat of science. It says vaccinations given to pigs have bled into pork and the pork into men. It says there is a toxin shaped like a key that fits a lock you would rather not name in public. It says if you add enough soy sauce to your rice you will padlock the door inside you against that key. Another rumor lifts its head. That sorcery has crossed the strait folded in a cargo of cloves. That some enemy has envied the city's brightness and dimmed it. Another rumor, crueler, says that men who are afraid deserve it. Women stand in these lines too. They are not immune to fear. They come for their brothers, their husbands, their sons, their own bodies, mysteries mirrored in this spectacle. A schoolteacher tells the nurse, "I know this is foolish, but knowledge is a shallow bowl when you are thirsty." The nurse, 2 pins in her hair, sleeves rolled, does not laugh. "We will fill it again," she says, "as often as you need." A soldier from the barracks arrives wearing his courage like a uniform that does not quite fit. He has tied a string tight around himself under his shorts, and when the doctor asks to examine him, he weeps, half from shame, half from relief that someone will look and not look away. The doctor, whose eyes have learned in the last weeks how to be gentle without becoming blind, snips the string. He tells the soldier to breathe as if blowing out a candle. He talks about muscles and nerves, about the way the brain's alarm bell can clang so loudly that the house seems already on fire. The soldier nods as if nodding were ballast. He leaves with a paper explanation folded like a small map. He will lose it by morning. The fear will know the route without it. Meanwhile, the radios become both priest and jester. They broadcast denials with the same breath that spreads the tale. "No epidemic," the announcer says, and the city hears only the word, "epidemic," the negation shearing off like a leaf in wind. Boys dare one another to stand hands-free for a minute, a joke with ragged edges. In dormitories, men sleep with one hand clamped, as if they are their own last friend. Yet there are islands of sanity built in a day. A hawker who has seen war and hunger and 3 landlords in 1 year decides to become a lighthouse. He ties no strings. He speaks instead to the men who come trembling to his stall. "I will tell you about my grandson," he begins, and by the time the bowl of noodles is empty, the man is breathing like a person again, not like a hunted thing. The hawker does this all week without charging a cent. It is the kind of public health that never appears in textbooks because it cannot be counted and cannot be reimbursed. And then, as such storms do, it begins to tire of itself. The city's fever steps down a little. The newspapers choose other headlines. The radios sell other soaps. But the story has been written into a tender place, that the body can be startled by an idea, that an idea, like certain insects, lays eggs in the dark and they hatch in warmth, that what we fear in the night can make a choreography of our hands in the day. The clinics are quieter. The city pretends it is healed. Pretending is one way of healing. But history, oh, history has seen this handwriting before. He is not famous. He keeps his notebooks in careful stacks and folds the corners only when he must. In them he is drawing a new kind of map, lines not of rivers or roads, but of rumors. Territories not of soil, but of belief. He has learned to listen to how fear travels. Not on foot, though feet help. Not by radio alone, though a dial can be a ferry. It moves along kinship, along jokes, along the small wire that runs from humiliation to rage. He sits in cheap chairs and asks men to tell him exactly what happened, to themselves, to their cousins, to that man in the hostel who tied a chopstick across his lap like a tourniquet and swore he felt the tide reverse. He asks not to catch them in error but to measure the angle at which truth bends under pressure. Some call it mass psychogenic illness, and the term is useful in the way a lantern is useful. What it shows well, but its light has edges. He wants the edges. He wants the part of the village that stands outside the lantern's circle holding its breath. In a fishing town, he hears of a healer who speaks to the shrinking as if it were a person and commands it to behave. She speaks softly, with the weariness of a mother who has learned that scolding works better when whispered. Men leave her hut calmer, warmer, less certain of doom. He writes her words down and recognizes that he is not merely collecting curiosities. He is watching medicine's older sibling, meaning, put its arm around medicine's shoulder and steer it through a crowd. He learns to predict where the story will land next, places where manhood is a costume worn with both pride and stage fright, where the radio is a loud guest, where migration has lifted young men out of the arms that used to hold them when they dreamed badly. He learns the importance of a certain kind of laughter, the kind that lets a man return to his seat among his friends without paying the toll of shame. He learns the cruelty of other kinds of laughter. One evening he meets a couple on a bench outside a clinic. The man has the familiar posture, the protective hold that has swept the city like a new style. The woman's hand covers his hands. The mapmaker sits beside them and, not as a professional but as a person, tells them about the first time he fainted in public, how the floor rose toward him like an embrace he did not want. They laugh, gently, surprised at the way another person's embarrassment can be a gift, and the man's shoulders drop a quarter-inch. It is not a cure. It is an inch of road reclaimed. His notebooks pile up. He traces the epidemic's receding wake and finds a scattered, stubborn mercy. Neighbors who tied threads not because they believed in magic but because it gave their friend a night's sleep. Vendors who offered distractions. Nurses who learned a tone of voice that could catch a falling man by the collar. He writes, at the bottom of a page, "Every fear is a story about the future told in the language of the body. If you change the language, sometimes you can change the future." The lantern goes out. Another is lit. The map continues. The strait glitters like a blade between islands, and across it the tail swims without getting wet. In the kampungs of Malaysia, dusk lowers itself like a lid. Men come back from rubber estates with hands that smell of sap and metal, and the rumor is waiting on the doorstep like a stray cat. It walks in before anyone can decide. A midwife with a laugh like a bell becomes, by a twist of need, an expert in fears not listed in her notebooks. She has delivered 60 babies and buried 3. She binds wounds with clean cloth and gossip with cleaner words. When the first young husband staggers to her doorway clutching himself as if the sea wanted to claim him, she sits him down on a rattan chair and gives him tea so sweet it could be mistaken for forgiveness. "Breathe," she says, and because the word has traveled safely through her mouth 1,000 times, during labors and storms, the man obeys. "It is there," he whispers. "It is going inside. Everything in you has a door," she answers. "And every door has a frame. Frames do not disappear in a single night. From house to house, in palm-shadowed lanes, threads appear at men's waists like prayers written on string. Some knots are deft, sailors' knots practiced in childhood on river ropes. Some are messy, hope knotted in a hurry. In the marketplace a tailor sells out of red thread by noon, and stares at his empty drawer as if it has eaten his fortune. Radio announcements drift over the rice fields. no contamination, no foreign sorcery, no curse. The denials are sung in 3 languages, but fear is fluent in all of them already. A boy tells his brother that a neighbor collapsed and went in. The brother's face goes the color of rainwater. Who told you? A friend. Which friend? The boy shrugs. Fear often arrives with unsigned letters. In Jakarta's crowded neighborhoods, a doctor trained abroad returns with a stethoscope that glitters like a small moon on his chest. He can name every muscle in 2 languages and can recite, as if it were poetry, the arc of a panic through a population. Suggestibility, he says to a colleague, and then, because that word sounds cruel in a sterile room, he says softly, loneliness. They design a ritual of care that is half clinic and half living room. Men enter still holding themselves like a last anchor, and are received not with laughter but with the ordinary. Shoes off. Sit. Tea that tastes of jasmine. A nurse's voice that never rises above the level of a lullaby. They talk about warmth and blood, about the way alarm dissolves soft tissues into flint, and the way flint refuses every kindness. They talk about breath like a friendly animal that returns when you call it the right name. At the end of one long evening, as rain draws silver threads through the air, the midwife and the doctor meet by accident in the hall. They nod, 2 different schools with 1 patient. We're not only pulling men back from an edge, the doctor says. We are moving the edge. The midwife smiles. Edges follow stories. Change the story, and the cliff becomes a step. They do not cure a continent. No one does. But for a little while, in villages where the lamps smell of kerosene and the night birds practice their one song, a softer ending is rehearsed and performed, a string loosened, a joke told without cruelty, a sleep that arrives like a slow tide and does not steal anything on its way in. The winter of 1984 folds itself around northern cities like a gray coat. Factories breathe, schoolyards echo, radio towers repeat themselves until even the birds learn the lines. In a port city, a worker with hands hard as the tools they use slips on an idea the way a man slips on ice. Someone at the dormitory says a neighbor vanished into himself. Someone else swears a cousin in another province did the same at the market, fell forward like a folding ruler, never to be right again. The worker ties a thin copper wire around his waist under his clothes. It bites. He likes the bite. It means he is not defenseless. The rumor has changed costumes. It wears now the coat of modern talk. Vaccines, contamination, industrial toxins. It speaks the language of chemical shapes, of safety posters pasted to walls. The fear is cosmopolitan and practical. It carries a lunch pail. At the municipal hospital, a young psychiatrist keeps a diary he will never show anyone. By day he lectures in the clean brightness of new rooms about Koro, the old term, and about its cousins in other places. He describes feedback loops and mass suggestion, the role of stress in bodies wound tight as wire. By night, he writes to the page in a voice stripped of diagram. Today I watched a man stand for an hour with his hands as a clamp because I could not find a sentence to take their place. The authorities print denials in black characters as square and confident as buildings. Newspapers that yesterday devoted columns to failed harvests now devote them to reassurance. No epidemic, they declare. Factories hold meetings in which danger is disassembled and redistributed into statistics. The announcements work and fail in the same motion, calming some, inflaming others. The rumor learns the trick of echo. It bounces off every denial and returns larger. The psychiatrist tries something new. The century changes. Phones hum like crickets in every pocket. A story now can cross oceans while a kettle boils. On message boards that glow blue in midnight rooms, fear writes itself in sentences that look like questions and feel like commands. A teenager in Manila reads about a curse in Lagos. A night shift worker in Guangzhou reads about Singapore's soy sauce. A fisherman's son in Kedah scrolls past diagrams of shrinking that are equal parts anatomy and myth. In a city where concrete rises fast as sugarcane, a general practitioner keeps her waiting room uncluttered and her gaze unhurried. She has learned a delicate skill, to acknowledge a patient's private catastrophe without adopting it. Men come in with the old posture, millennia compressed into muscle memory, the protective hold, the eyes that ricochet off surfaces as if looking too long at anything might trigger a trap. She speaks to them not as pathologies but as travelers who have wandered into weather. "Have you slept?" she asks. "Not really. Eat something warm today. Let's talk about what alarms are for, and what happens when one keeps ringing." She prints, for those who want paper to hold against the wind, a one-page guide titled, "When Your Body Hears a Story and Believes It." It lists breath like a ladder, the warmth of a bath, the small physics of muscles that answer panic with tension and can be answered back with gentleness. It lists a thing most men have forgotten how to ask for: company. Bring a friend. Let him sit in the chair and talk about football while you notice that nothing vanishes under a conversation about last night's match. Outside the clinic, a community group meets in the back of a grocery store after hours. They brew tea in kettles stained with a decade of meetings. A retired shipbuilder talks about the night in 1967 when he almost believed the city would fold in on him. A younger man reads aloud a post from an online forum where panic tries on new clothes and asks for help. They do not dispute facts tonight, they practice presence. Someone tells a ridiculous joke. Someone cries and is not hurried. The general practitioner thinks often of walls. Hospitals have them, rumor does not. She dreams of clinics made of time and attention, clinics that can be unfolded like maps on any table, in a dormitory lounge, in a market, on a bus when a man's breath picks up its old stammer. She trains volunteers not in medicine but in the craft of steadiness. "Your voice is a handrail," she tells them. "Let him hold it until the stairs are over. In a year she will move to another city and begin again, and the rumor, this old traveler, will be there waiting, wearing some new hat, speaking in a new dialect of dread. She will not be surprised. She will set her kettle on to boil. She will put 2 cups on the table. On a campus where jacaranda petals fall like confetti from a celebration no one remembers planning, a psychologist teaches a class with the windows open. She writes on the board not the old names of illnesses but the newer grammar of attention, how the mind, catching sight of itself in a dark mirror, can mistake its reflection for an intruder. how breath can be both messenger and message. She invites her students to bring her rumors like stray dogs. "We will feed them," she says, "and then we will help them find their way back home." They bring her tales from grandparents, threads tied in winter's long past, clothespins and belts and whispered advice. They bring her screenshots from glowing midnight rectangles, message boards throbbing with anonymous heartbeats, where a handful of cruel sentences throw long shadows and a single kind one lights a square foot of night. In a lab lit like a careful morning, she designs a small experiment that is mostly an excuse to offer gentleness under the cover of method. Volunteers read a frightening account about shrinking like a cable being pulled. Then half of them are given a counter-story that names the body's alarms and offers a ladder back to calm. She doesn't measure heroism. She measures pulse, breath, the steadiness of a hand unlearning its own panic. The numbers modestly tilt toward mercy. She does not publish with fanfare. She prints one extra copy of the paper and tucks it into her bag like a bandage she might need later on a bus. Because the more important experiment happens there, on a night bus that smells faintly of diesel and warm plastic, when a young man in a blue work shirt begins to breathe like a cornered animal. His hands move to the posture so many hands have learned. Passengers look away, that hurried politeness by which we try to spare one another embarrassment, and instead leave one another alone. The psychologist moves across the aisle with the unstartling pace of a librarian. He asks a radio host for 10 minutes not to argue with the fear but to re-narrate it. He does not say, "Imagined." He says, "Misinterpreted." He does not say, "Weak." He says, "Human." He tells a story of nerves like skittish horses, of muscles that respond to alarm by shrinking back, of a brain that rings a bell so hard the floor trembles. He asks listeners to hold a warm cloth against their lower belly and breathe to a count of 4, as if they were talking an old friend down a ladder. He asks them to tie, if they must, a ribbon that does not cut. That night, calls flood the station. Some are angry. Fear often wears anger like armor. But others are soft with gratitude that someone has spoken in a register that does not turn them into the butt of a joke. In dormitories, men who would have jeered 2 weeks ago now practice the breathing in secret, then in twos, then openly. The copper wires are replaced by cloth belts, then by nothing. The hospital's corridor is a little quieter by the end of the month. In his diary, the psychiatrist writes, "A fact is not enough. A fact must be sung in a key the fear can hear." He closes the notebook and sleeps for 4 hours straight, the longest in weeks. Outside, factories hum like enormous cats. The city dreams of being durable. For a while it is. The wind that leaves Asia does not stop at the Arabian Sea. It crosses deserts with its tongue full of grit and arrives, exhausted and persistent, on the Gulf of Guinea. In markets bright with plastic bowls and drying fish, another tale has been walking for years, not shrinking this time, but theft. A thief with no hands who steals with his eyes, with a touch, with a word. Shake, and your manhood is gone. Lagos at noon is a fever of horns and heat. A taxi slows. A hand reaches in to ask for change. Another hand slaps it away. Someone shouts, "Thief!" not of wallet, but of what cannot be seen, and the crowd arrives like weather. The accused pales and protests. He is punched, dragged, rescued, arrested, released, accused again. Stories reproduce with a fertility that would make a rabbit proud. A man shook hands and felt a chill like a door opening inward. Another woke from a nap lighter by a future. To call these rumors is to miss their weight. They land on bones. At a university, a professor of literature gathers students in a circle and asks them to track the path of these narratives. He quotes Achebe, "The center," he says, "the center is always listening." Why now? Why here? The students talk about money scarce as snow, about masculinity negotiated in the streets like any other commodity, about the way a crowd can become a mirror that shows you your worst face and insists it is yours. A young journalist travels by crowded bus from Benin City to Accra with a notebook that grows fat and a heart that grows tired. He learns to arrive at the rumor as one arrives at an argument in a family, with respect for the heat it contains. He speaks to men who swear they felt themselves vanish with the brush of a stranger's sleeve. He speaks to men accused of stealing what no hand can hold. He speaks to mothers who tell their sons not to shake hands, to pastors who preach against invisible bandits, to policemen who carry both guns and laughter. At a roadside clinic outside Cotonou, a nurse has a ritual as old as kindness. She offers a chair that does not wobble. She listens as if the story is not ridiculous because to the teller it is not. She places a hand on a forearm the way a bridge lays itself over a river too fast to ford. She asks for a breath counted like beads on a cord. She asks the man to notice the room itself, the window like a framed sky, the clock's second hand that does not lie. She lets ordinary reality accumulate like sand until the panic cannot find its footing. The journalist writes his article and chooses its title with care. A city of borrowed fears. He does not mock. He suggests that when economies grind and futures stutter, what men fear most is the vanishing proof of being wanted, being able, being chosen. He sends the story to an editor who has learned that sometimes the bravest thing a paper can print is a tenderness. The editor runs it on page 3, where news lives that will outlast page 1. No proclamation ends this. Crowds still rise sometimes, in the no man's land between noon and dusk. But in some neighborhoods, the charge of the word thief weakens. A teacher insists on fist bumps for a semester, and the boys laugh, and then stop laughing, and then forget to be afraid. The rumor, finding fewer doors unlocked, prowls a while and then moves on in search of a new city that has not learned the name of its own pulse. "I'm going to sit here," she says, "and we'll breathe together so this ride is less of a storm." She does not reach for the man or for his story. She reaches for the rhythm behind it. 4 counts in, 6 counts out. A sentence that makes a foothold. Your muscles are trying to do a job. Let's show them a better one. The bus lurches. The city passes in small constellations of shop signs. The young man's shoulder softens a degree that only the body notices. When he can speak, he says the words people have said for centuries in 100 accents. "I thought I was disappearing." She answers with the oldest answer that is not a lie. "You are here." She taps the metal pole between them, once. The sound is tiny and absolute. "And so am I." Later, in her office, she sketches a note to herself. "Do not argue with ghosts. offer them a chair. She closes the window. The jacaranda keeps falling like a quiet purple rain. There is a folktale told wherever tracks run straight through the heart of a place, of a switchman who, on certain nights, could hear trains before they were built. He would walk the rails and move the levers long in advance, so that when the distance finally condensed into metal, catastrophe would already have been averted. Most people laugh. A few nod. Editors, at their best, are switchmen. In a small newsroom in 1967, a sub-editor stared at a headline about soy sauce and fear and felt the rails hum. He trimmed the panic from the title, moved the denial to the first sentence, added a paragraph about clinics with open doors and nurses with unshakable voices. The paper went to print with a tone that did not oil the rumor's gears. That edition saved a handful of nights for a handful of men. He never knew. He went home, kissed his child, fell asleep with black ink still in the grooves of his fingers. Decades later, a digital editor sits in front of a dashboard where stories behave like weather, gusts of clicks, sudden rains of outrage. A pitch arrives, new wave of vanishing manhood in the city. And for a brief, exhausted second she tastes the old sensationalism like metal. Then the switchman wakes in her. She asks for a different draft, one that starts not with the most lurid anecdote, but with the clinic that poured tea and held hands. Not with plague, but with panic that can be soothed. The revised piece will not break traffic records. It will wedge open a window in 2 apartments where fear had papered them shut. In a railway town, a rumor once raced the noon train and reached the market first. Men bought string. Women boiled ginger. A schoolmaster climbed a stool and told a story about a switchman who listened for the future so hard he could hear its danger footsteps away. "We can do that," the schoolmaster said. "We can hear ourselves 5 minutes from now, laughing about how frightened we were, and choose that track instead." The crowd chuckled, half embarrassed, and the rumor stumbled, missing a step. Even medicine learns this folktale. A surgeon in a coastal hospital, stern as a lighthouse, keeps a drawer of sentences for use before fear reaches the operating theater. "If you feel a pull," he says to a trembling conscript, "it is not vanishing, it is a muscle trying to protect. Protection sometimes feels like retreat. We will teach it advance." He has practiced the speech until its syllables fit any mouth, any dialect, any dusk. He is switching tracks, no theorems on the board, just words arriving on time where catastrophe would otherwise be. The folktale travels in pockets and presses itself like a coin into palms when needed. The switch is not lever and steel. It is a tone. It is the timing of a hand offered exactly before the stumble, so that there is never a fall to remember. A carpenter in Kedah who once tied string around his waist now ties toys for his grandson. Kites whose tails never strangle, tops that hum like bees. He keeps a secret museum of the city's panic in a biscuit tin, a short length of faded thread, a clipping from a paper that used the word epidemic, and then crossed it out, a clinic ticket with the number 428 in blue ink. When the boy asks for a story, the carpenter tells him about the year the radios learned to whisper and how the whisper learned to knock. He leaves out the terror's teeth but keeps the lesson's bones, that a neighbor's steady voice is a rope, that you can be braver together than alone. In a barracks, a sergeant whose youth was cut in the pattern of alarm teaches recruits a drill that does not appear in manuals. Stand at ease, he says, and when they do not know how, he shows them, shoulders lowering, jaw unclenching, hands leaving the guard of their own bodies. You think the enemy is outside, he tells them, not unkindly. And sometimes he is. But sometimes he is your own bell, ringing. Learn the off switch. The recruits grin, then listen, then practice. A new kind of discipline grows in the yard like grass after rain. In a hardware shop near a ferry pier, spools of wire gleam in patient spirals. A man comes in with the old request on his tongue and shame in his eyes. Something to tie. The shopkeeper, who has kept his own wrists out of history by a fingernail, slides the wire back into its shelf and instead places on the counter a coil of soft ribbon and a story about a nephew who learned to breathe out longer than he breathed in, as if he were pouring water from a jug. The customer nods. Something unclenches. He buys nails instead and goes home to fix what actually needs fixing. The roomer, denied fuel, drifts down the street bored, looking for livelier company. Across the archipelago of fathers, by blood, by choice, by role, another inheritance is rehearsed, not the handing down of fear's tricks, but the passing on of the antidotes. A fisherman teaches his son the names of constellations and also the name of the feeling that arrives like a wave under the skin. They give it a ridiculous nickname so it will come when called and leave when dismissed. A bus driver instructs his nephew in routes and timetables and also how to sit with a trembling friend without reaching for the first joke like a weapon. The biscuit tin grows heavier with paper and lighter with dread. On a certain afternoon, the carpenter lifts out the string and considers throwing it away, and then keeps it. Not as a fetish, but as a fossil. A record of the species' fear became that year and the ways the city evolved to survive it. This is the chapter that does not list dates or governments because midnight belongs to no empire. It belongs to you, when the room is a little too quiet and the old story knocks on your ribs. It begins, as manuals do, with a diagram you cannot see, a small bell wired to a large house. The bell rings. Maybe because a sentence you scrolled past found you vulnerable. Maybe because a glance in the mirror arrived with more gravity than expected. Maybe because the body, remembering an ancestor's cold river, leaps at shadows. The house shakes. You mistake the shaking for collapse. Turn to page 1. Breathe as if you had been running and just now saw a friend at the gate. 4 in, 6 out. The exhale is where the house listens to you. Put one palm, light as a moth, below your navel. Not to guard, but to greet. Name the muscles as if they were children hiding under a table. Come out, you say gently. The storm has already passed. You may come out. Page 2. Company. If there is a person in the next room, borrow their voice for 10 minutes. If there is a voice on the phone, borrow that one. Say aloud what the fear claims. The ridiculousness is part of the antidote. And then say aloud the world as it actually is. The clock hand doing its loop. The hum of the fridge. The neighbor's kettle beginning to gossip 3 floors down. Keep describing until the room is heavier than the rumor. Page 3. Warmth. It has always been warmth. Tea. A bath. A cloth heated like a small sunrise and placed not as a barricade but as hospitality. The body meets stories at the temperature of skin. Give the story a warm chair and it often becomes a guest instead of a burglar. Page 4. Laughter with manners. The kind that steps softly over shame's threshold and sits on the floor. A joke that slips its hand into yours without pulling. Not the hard laughter that breaks things, the rope ladder laughter. If you do not have a joke, borrow one from an old auntie's kitchen or a market stall where the jokes have been sanded smooth by many hands. Page 5. If all else fails, make a list of names. The doctor who did not flinch. The midwife who sweetened the tea until fear was less bitter. The radio host who said human instead of weak. The switchman who asked for a different headline. The father who tied toys instead of threads. The stranger on a bus who tapped a pole once like a tiny bell and said, "You are here." Read the names like prayer beads. Remember that panic is a circle drawn in chalk. Spit in your palm, rub, and the circle opens. Walk out. If you wake again at 3, repeat. Manuals are not magic. They are bridges built out of sentences and ordinary objects. Cross them as many times as you need. The arch on the bridge is held up by people you will never meet who, in their time, crossed their own and left notes carved into the railings. This way. This way. This way. Mornings return with their ordinary chores, shutters unhooked, floors sluiced, kettles arguing toward a boil. But the city does not forget quickly. It keeps its memory the way a coral keeps storms, layered into a growth ring you can read if you know the code. In the months after the panic loosens its jaw, little practices remain like prayer flags. Men who still, out of habit, touch their waists when a car backfires. Aunties who keep soy sauce on the table like a talisman even when no one reaches for it with that old zeal. Nurses who adopt a tone of voice that lowers shoulders from across a room. The ministry holds a post-mortem with neat folders and charts. A senior officer taps a graph that looks like a mountain range a child might draw, all steep ascent and sudden fall. Communication failures, someone says, underlining the obvious. Another notes, with a slow pencil, that what failed was not merely information but companionship. Men who slept alone in crowded dormitories, boys whose fathers had sailed away, workers whose mothers were far upriver and unreachable by any phone. Loneliness, they write, though no budget line item will fund its cure. In a coffee shop by a market where fish still glitter on ice like coins pulled up from myth, a regular with a hoarse laugh tells newcomers the city's cautionary tale with the affection reserved for a relative who embarrassed the family at a wedding. We panicked, he says, and we learned. Now we greet our fears at the door and make them wait by the shoes. The table roars. The laughter is not cruel. It is civic engineering. It builds a quay where floods used to pour. At a school assembly, a headmaster, once a conscript who queued at a clinic with his friends in the nervous dusk, tells the students that bodies listen to stories. That stories can be medicine. That ridicule is a toxin with a pleasant aftertaste and a long half-life. He shows them how to count a slow breath and how to put a hand, not as a prison but as a promise, over the soft place below the navel. This, he says, smiling at their embarrassed grins, is a lever that lifts more than you think. A new doctor arrives at the port clinic where the old rumor first found its audience. She inherits a desk with a drawer that sticks and a waiting room whose benches have learned the weight of alarm. In her first week, 3 men present with echoes of the old fear. She does not laugh. She does not hurry. She invites them to notice the fan's gentle chop of air, the varnished shine on the bench, the tiny chip in the blue tile by the door, realities that anchor. 2 breathe easier before they leave. The third asks, whispering, if he may come back tomorrow, not to be examined, but to practice the breathing where he first learned to drown. She says yes. He returns twice, then stops needing to. The city adds the episode to its pantheon of stories alongside flood and fire, famine and strike. The tale of the year a rumor learned to march and the year after, when the city learned to make it halt. History is not only what happened, it is also the choreography we teach ourselves so that, next time, our feet remember the steps. Across older centuries the archive of fear sits shyer than royal edicts, less boastful than war memorials, but persistent. A bamboo slip records a healer advising rice gruel and company. A temple court transcribes a dispute in which a husband begs for the return of vitality stolen by a fox spirit, and the priest, half judge, half playwright, resolves the matter by staging a ritual that is less exorcism than theater of reassurance. In a mountain village, a grandmother marks, in a ledger that also lists births and deaths and the price of salt, a winter week when young men tied red threads and elders sang them home. A Jesuit traveler in the 18th century copies, with scholarly care, a Chinese case describing Koro, his transliteration awkward but earnest. He tries to fold the tale into European categories: melancholy, hypochondria, hysteria. The fit is imperfect, like a borrowed coat. Yet in a margin he writes, in tiny letters, consolation appears to be the more potent physic. He will never publish the sentence. It is too small, too domestic for the appetite of scholarship. It survives as a private footnote to the grander preoccupations of empire. In a coastal town under Qing skies, a literary society debates a poem that compares a panic to a tortoise drawing into its shell at thunder's first mutter. One member insists the metaphor is vulgar. Another, more practical, says, a village understands tortoises. Use what the village understands. They vote to keep the stanza. The poem is memorized by boys who will become men who, in a bad winter, will remember 2 lines and find in them not art but instruction. That withdrawal can be the body's clumsy kindness. That coaxing works better than command. Under British rule in Malaya, a magistrate hears a case brought by a laborer who accuses a foreman of ridicule that made my spirit leave my lower belly. The court laughs, then quiets as the man trembles. The magistrate, whose own son, alone at a boarding school, has begun waking at 3, admonishes the room and orders compensation framed not as acknowledgement of sorcery but as redress for cruelty. He has switched rails without changing trains. The law writes this down as a curiosity. The man goes home with money enough to pay rent and a public record that says, in dry ink, that humiliation can be wound. The whispering archive grows, small entries in temple logs, a village's collective decision to humor an anxious newlywed, a midwife's recipe, ginger broth, the unhurried presence of older women, These are not the documents that conquerors carry off in trunks. They travel disguised in recipes and lullabies. But when a later century flips the pages looking for precedents, it will find them, quiet fingerprints where fear once placed its hand and community placed another over it, warm and steady, until the tremor passed. There comes a season when feeds behave like weather in a desert canyon, short, brutal storms that carve rock. A post carries a trembling voice into rooms it never would have entered in earlier eras. Is this happening to me? Replies arrive in 1,000 registers, mockery that wins itself like barbed wire, well-meaning advice that confuses precision with care, links to diagrams shaded a medical blue, slogans that mistake volume for truth. Somewhere, in the fourth reply from the top, a stranger writes the sentence that saves the night. You are breathing like a chaste thing. Let's breathe like a person. The platform does not know it hosts clinics. It optimizes for engagement, not for the slow work of steadiness. And yet threads become waiting rooms. Direct messages become hallways where a nurse might catch your sleeve as you pass and say, "Sit." Tea? A woman in Cebu writes, in a tone soft enough to be mistaken for silence, the steps that once helped her clear a similar storm. Warmth, breath, company. The naming of muscles as if they were children shy to return to the party. A student in Guangzhou translates it, adds a tiny drawing of a handrail and the word, hold. A taxi driver in Accra reposts it with a story from years earlier about a handshake rumor that ate afternoons and how a circle of men learned to laugh at it without laughing at one another. Not every corner of the network is kind. A meme makes the rounds that turns panic into punchline, and for a week the nights run hotter. But then something stubbornly decent asserts itself. Communities start pinning first aid replies to posts that might spiral, like note cards taped near a public defibrillator. They list breath counts. They list the phone numbers of late-night friends. They list phrases that have worked in many mouths. You are here, this is a muscle's mistake. Not your vanishing. Let's anchor in the room. The first pinned reply is clumsy. The 10th is better. By the 100th, it is a craft. A content moderator, exhausted, underpaid, and possessed of a discipline not measured in dashboards, quietly shifts policy in her patch. Posts about shrinking that aim to terrorize are throttled. Posts that aim to soothe are given a narrow corridor of light. She cannot change the platform's appetite, but she can nudge which dishes are within reach. She becomes, without intending it, another switchman. On a sleepless midnight, a man scrolls with that particular hunger for catastrophe. He finds the familiar dread coiling, word by word, image by image, and then he finds the pinned card, Manual for Midnight Short Form. He tries the steps with the skepticism of a person who has been fooled by many cures. The breath lengthens despite him. His hand loosens. He looks around the room as instructed and names the lamp, the curtain, the stain on the desk that looks like a small map of Sumatra. He posts the next morning shyly. It helped. The thread does not go viral. It goes local, into 3 pockets and 5 kitchens, which is the correct direction for most salvations. In a quiet annex of the city museum, past the heroic dioramas of ships and treaties, past the bronze busts that shine where schoolchildren rub them, sits an exhibit that most visitors find by mistake. The sign is small, The museum of what did not happen. Inside, glass cases hold the fossils of diverted catastrophes. A headline draft with the word plague struck through. A pair of hands drawn in charcoal relaxing from their clamp. A spool of ribbon frayed by use and then retired. A clinic ticket stamped at midnight beside a thermos that smells faintly, eternally, of jasmine. A docent, retired nurse, hair like a soft cloud, tells the story of the shrinking panic in a voice that never turns it into spectacle. She points to a handset from a radio studio, to a midwife's ledger, to a university flyer titled "When Your Body Hears a Story and Believes It." This, she says, is the record of a city remembering how to accompany itself. Visitors leave notes on a wall too humble to be called a monument. "I didn't faint in the bus because a stranger breathed with me," writes one. "My brother stopped tying threads when the sergeant taught the off switch," writes another. "I moderated a forum differently after reading the manual," says a third. The handwriting varies. Childish loops, engineers' angles, the drift of someone who writes mostly on screens now. But the chorus is legible. Gratitude for the unremarkable heroism of ordinary hours. In a last case, almost hidden, rests a cracked clothespin. The card reads, "Used not as cruelty, but as certainty, until certainty learned other shapes." A boy asks his mother why anyone would need such a thing. The mother, who once, in a hostile corridor, pressed a warm towel into a stranger's shaking hands, says, "Because sometimes people don't know the names of their doors." The boy nods as if this were an answer about keys and locks. It is, in a way. Outside, the museum cafe serves ginger broth on the house to anyone who orders tea. The tray cards quote a line from the Whispering Archive: "Those who are laughed at are most endangered." Laughter still happens. This is a city, not a monastery, but here it has had its nails trimmed. Jokes arrive like playful cats and are shooed away when they start to scratch. As dusk climbs the glass of the atrium, the docent locks the door of the annex and stands a moment with her palm against it. She is thinking of the museum's strange vocation, to keep evidence not only of battles fought with steel, but of those fought with tone and timing, to praise the switchman, the kettle, the pinned reply, the soft ribbon, the sentence in a doctor's mouth that arrived exactly when catastrophe was selecting a chair. She turns out the lights. In the reflected dark, she can see herself, and behind her, if she squints, the outline of a city that, for now, remembers the choreography that keeps its fear from learning new steps. She arrives in port cities with one suitcase and a poster tube that always gets dented in transit. The posters are maps, but not of rivers or subway lines. They diagram how fear circulates through neighborhoods, how a rumor boards a bus at dawn, collects passengers in dormitories and stairwells, and disembarks at midnight clinics with its pockets full of hearts. She is a public health worker by credential and a cartographer of tenderness by vocation. Her practice is simple and strange. In a fishing district, she coaxed shopkeepers into forming a chair circle. 5 chairs in a quiet corner. No paperwork, no diagnosis, just chairs. A handwritten sign says, "Sit here when the alarm bell will not stop." In a textile quarter, she persuaded a mosque, a temple, and a church to share a kettle patrol, volunteers carrying wide-mouthed flasks of ginger tea down alleys where night stutters. The kettle bearers were given a phrase to memorize, translated into every tongue within earshot. Your body believes you are falling. Can I sit while you land? She keeps a ledger, like the midwives before her, dates, places, small victories. Kuala Lumpur. Two brothers learned to say, the tortoise, as a joke that saved face when the old posture tempted them. Guangzhou. A factory dorm adopted 4 and 6 breathing as an inside joke, until it was no joke, just a shared rhythm. Accra. A driver printed the manual for midnight short form on the back of his route map. Passengers found it by accident and then on purpose. Officials tolerate her because the graphs move the right direction when she visits. Old women adore her because she listens as if memory were gold. She never writes Koro or Koro on her posters. She writes misinterpreted alarms and draws small bells with soft clappers. She tells a story about a house wired too sensitively to thunder. We can't stop storms, she says to a room full of men who came stiff with embarrassment and left with laughter hiding in their sleeves. But we can teach the bell to ring less, and our hands to lower without shame. On a certain evening in a hostel with peeling blue paint, a young migrant sits in the chair circle breathing like someone who has waited too long to swim. The cartographer sits beside him and names the room. Window, fan, the faint tick of a clock shaped like a fish. Say them too, she whispers, and he does, and hears his own voice as evidence that he is still here. When he stands, he touches the back of the chair like a relic. This map, he says, tapping his chest, is easier to read now. She nods as if he has just discovered a coastline. In a colonial court where the ceiling fans turn like tired palms, an inspector of health stands between two worlds without quite belonging to either. He writes reports in the Empire's English and listens in market Malay. He drinks tea with magistrates and eats with nurses. He knows that the truth often crosses the room disguised as a servant. He has learned to file 2 kinds of paperwork. One is for the office, typed, stamped, obedient to headings. The other is for his pocket, quick notes about the currency of kindness. Village headman approved, laughing early. Practice at dawn to dissolve rumor. Midwife instructed to keep 2 extra bowls for nervous boys. Tailor refuses to sell wire for tying, substitutes ribbon and a story. His superiors skim the official reports and nod at the phrase. Mass suggestion events compensated by outreach. The pocket notes he reads alone when the lantern burns low, knowing that empires do not archive such things but cities survive on them. On medical rounds at a mission hospital, whitewashed, echoing, staffed by a nun whose hands can lower fevers by tone alone, he watches a physician speak to a trembling dockworker not as suspect but as citizen of an invisible storm. You have been hearing a story, the physician says, and your muscles believed it. Their loyalty is admirable. We will teach them a better loyalty. The dockworker laughs from relief at being praised for once by a person in a coat. The inspector writes, praise works faster than liniment. He sits through a trial where a man accuses another of stealing the proof of me, with a glance. The courtroom smirks until the inspector whispers to the magistrate, who then frames the verdict around insult and fear, not sorcery. Compensation is ordered, not for magic, but for humiliation and the panic it birthed. On the way out, the inspector stops the plaintiff and quietly teaches him the 4 and 6 breath. He will note none of this in the file. He will feel it under his ribs for a week. At home, he keeps a simple museum in a biscuit tin, scraps of ribbon, a clipped paragraph from a newspaper that used the word epidemic before striking it through, a tea tag stained brown, a broken clothespin. Years later, his granddaughter, a student of public health, will open the tin and read the past like Braille. She will go on to draw maps of tenderness and carry kettles into alleys, and she will think, not without irony, that the empire accidentally trained a lineage of people who saved lives with chairs and tones. In Bangkok, 1976, market stalls shine like lacquered fruit under fluorescent light. Rumor arrives as it always does, out of breath, certain. A boy in a dormitory swears his friend vanished into himself after a shower. Another swears a cousin saved himself with rubber bands. Bands snap, snap. Laughter cracks like dry bamboo. Clinics fill. Nurses who have learned the altitude of panic lower it with jokes that never point. Doctors who have read old Chinese case notes say the new word, koro, to skeptics and misinterpreted alarm to everyone else. The tide recedes. Hanoi, 1990s. A university prints a pamphlet with a cartoon of a tortoise not as mockery but as manual. The tortoise withdraws, then peeks out, encouraged by tea steam and community. Students keep the pamphlet in their satchel between the physics notes and a photograph of a band they love. When the rumor knocks, they do not open the door. They open the booklet and chuckle at the turtle's patient face. The knock fades. Manila, 2000s. Jeepneys carry bright saints on their hoods and inside, passengers pray to screens. A thread on a forum gathers pace until it sounds like thunder in many rooms. A nurse named Isabella moderates without calling it that. She pins a reply she learned from her grandmother's kitchen. Breath, warmth, company, and adds a line in Tagalog that translates roughly as, "Your courage is not later, it's this." The thread calms. 2 years on, the hospital quietly notes fewer nighttime admissions of a certain kind. None of these storms become the legend the soy sauce years became, because cities learn to practice gentleness like a drill. Schools rehearse a 3-minute exercise at assemblies. Name 3 things in the room out loud. Put your hand to your lower belly as greeting. 4 and 6. Barracks teach. Off switch. Alongside parade rest. Newsrooms sand the shark fin edges off headlines. The storm finds itself outnumbered by little umbrellas. It practices being gentler because the city refuses to practice being afraid. A visiting researcher, pale from library light, collects interviews and departs with the sense that he has documented nothing extraordinary. He is right and wrong. He has witnessed a civilization teach its sons and brothers the choreography of not vanishing. Every city has a harbor that appears only after certain storms, not of ships, but of chairs and kettles, of voices that learned the key of reassurance and kept singing when the choir disbanded. It is drawn on no official chart. You find it by following the line of people who once believed that their bodies were leaving them and discovered, by increments, that they were being returned. Here, the artifacts of the tale lie without glass. A ribbon in a bowl you may finger and then put back. A radio where you can press the button and hear the voice that said human instead of weak. A bicycle with a wire basket full of photocopied manual for midnight, sheets in 4 languages. A wooden pole from a bus, pitted by years of hands, which you can tap once to produce that small absolute sound that tells a heart it is not alone. Visitors sign a ledger, not names, but sentences. I breathed. I laughed without hurting myself. I found a handrail. The bell grew quieter. Some right dates: 1967, 1984, 2016, yesterday. Some draw tortoises. Some draw chairs. Someone sketches a switchman at a track lever, smiling. At the far end of the harbor sits a bench with space for 2. If you sit there long enough, you will witness the old posture approach, a stranger at dusk, hands beginning their ancient choreography. You will see the bench's other occupant shift without alarm, make room, offer the only medicine that has never once depleted in the city's stockrooms: company. No speeches. The forensics counted softly. A gentle inventory of the world as it is, the gull that heckles the water, the smell of oil and orange peels, the ferry's horn sounding like a great animal clearing its throat. When the stranger stands, surprised to still be the size of himself, the harbor acquires another stone. Harbors are built like that, not by decree, but by repetition, not by miracle, but by manners. The map of this city, of any city that has survived its rumors, ends not at a sea full of dragons but at this quiet water where fear arrives, looks around, and finding no echo, sits down to rest. And if, tonight, the bell in your house rings loud enough that the furniture trembles, you can come here in your mind. You can sit on the bench and let the harbor's ordinary hum outvote the rumor's orchestra. You can say, as dock workers have said, and professors and midwives and soldiers and boys in dormitories and men on buses and women at keyboards, each in their own tongue the same old words. I am here. Tap the rail once. Feel the certainty of small metal. Breathe. Let morning take the watch. A bowl of rice cools on a laminate table in a London bedsit that smells faintly of cardamom and rain in the hallway carpet. On the phone screen, a family group chat blooms like bougainvillea, aunties in Penang, a cousin in Guangzhou with her baby asleep in a sling, an uncle in Accra whose jokes always arrive 5 minutes too early, and therefore exactly on time. The old rumor, restless, cosmopolitan, jumps borders with the irreverence of a meme. Someone pastes a screenshot. Someone else replies with alarm wearing the mask of advice. The room tightens. Across 3 time zones a voice note arrives, not text. It is the grandmother who kept a ledger of winters and prices of salt. Her voice is a chair being pulled out from a table you thought was too crowded. Listen, she says, the body hears stories. You must tell it better once. She counts the breath, 4, 6, over the tiny speaker, as if stirring porridge. The young man in the bedsit follows, because obedience to an elder is a path his muscles remember when his mind forgets. He feels something in him sit down. In a minicab gliding past sodium-lit warehouses, another bridge is built. The driver hears a passenger's breath stutter into that old hunted pattern and, without ceremony, turns the radio to a station where the announcer speaks like a warm kitchen. Say what you see. The driver murmurs, eyes on the road. Orange light on the sign. A man in a yellow jacket. Wet black road. Reality returns as inventory. Panic, disliking lists, goes to bother someone less organized. On a small island of the Pacific, a young nurse moderates a cousin's thread with a steadiness she learned in school and perfected in the ward. She pins a short card. Manual for midnight short form. She adds a drawing of a tortoise half in, half out, steam rising from a cup beside it. The drawing is intentionally silly, a pressure valve. Comments that would have sharpened the rumor are now softened by the cartoon's patience. The bridge is not a single span but many planks laid by different hands, a grandmother's breath count. A driver's inventory, a nurse's pinned card, an uncle's joke whose kindness survives its clumsiness. Bandwidth carries panic quickly. It carries mercy just as fast when someone remembers where the switch is. In a drill hall that once taught only forward and halt, they add a new posture to the catalog: stand at ease inside. The sergeant, gray at the temples and patient as wet rope, demonstrates. Not slouch, he says. Permission. Shoulders lower. Jaw releases. The men grin, embarrassed by so much softness in a room built of orders. They practice anyway. The rumor, when it tries the barracks door weeks later, finds fewer hands free to play its old game. At a primary school assembly, children stand in rows under a tin roof that gargles rain. A teacher with chalk on her sleeve leads 3 minutes the way a conductor leads a hymn. Name 3 things you can see. The children sing back. Blue bucket. Broken cricket bat. Big cloud like a buffalo. Laughter. No, she says, smiling. Greet your belly like an old friend who came a long way to the party. The children clap a hand below the navel with solemn silliness. The ritual lodges itself in their hands like a useful tune. Public health prints a field guide in the size of a pocket. It is humble as a bus ticket and twice as traveled. On its cover, the gentle hand, a quick primer for misinterpreted alarms. Inside, drawings of chairs in circles, a kettle with steam drawn like hair, a radio microphone, a pole to tap once, a ribbon in a bowl. Each drawing captions a verb. Sit. Warm. Speak. Tap. Loosen. Nothing in it can be patented. Everything in it can be taught by anyone to anyone, which is the only kind of medicine that scales without breaking. A newsroom, remembering its worst and best nights, adds a line to its stylebook. When covering panics and rumors about bodies, lead with the antidotes. The line is small. It changes more headlines than anyone suspects, and changes, therefore, more evenings than headlines deserve to. In a village where mango trees drop fruit like punctuation marks, a midwife trains her apprentice in the doctrine's simplest theorems. First, don't argue with thunder, she says. Second, put soup on. The apprentice writes it down as if it were pharmacology. It is. They are not the heroes of posters. Their photographs, when they appear at all, show shirts that do not fit and smiles practiced only for weddings. Clipboards, pencils chewed smooth, shoes that know puddles by name. They count clinic visits before, during, after. They count how many men arrive with strings and how many leave without them. They record the days when the radio host borrowed 10 minutes to sing facts in a key fear could hear. They plot a small dip afterward, shaped like relief. A woman in spectacles that forever slide down her nose keeps a ledger in which 2 columns have no official titles. She calls them, privately, presence and mockery. On nights when the city is kind, kettle patrols out, chair circles full, presence rises, and the graph of panic falls like evening temperature. On days when a sensational headline sprints through the market, mockery spikes, and the line jolts upward. Correlation is not causation. She lectures herself dutifully, even as she watches cause and effect flirt through the glass. Still, she is careful. The footnotes to her charts are longer than the charts. A graduate student, smelling of library paste and optimism, compares storms across decades, the soy sauce panic, the copper wire winter, the handshake thefts. He is surprised to find the same half-life when neighborhoods rehearse the doctrine of the gentle hand. He does not claim victory for any one intervention. He makes a modest argument that cities grow vaccines against bad stories, dose by dose, encounter by encounter, until the rumors are falls below 1 and the outbreak dies not with a scandal, but with a yawn. The statisticians are not sentimental. They know numbers can be crucibles for bias. But when their charts are shown to ministers, budgets move a little toward kettles and away from megaphones. A nurse's hours are extended by a line that used to represent a battlefield. A radio slot is funded by a curve that looks like a hill children would roll down laughing. This is the arithmetic of mercy, small numbers rearranged to save large evenings. One of them, near retirement, adds an unscientific appendix to a report whose title no one will remember. A page with 5 names under the heading, Switchman. A sub-editor who cut a word in 1967. A moderator who pinned the right card in 2018. A sergeant who taught an off switch. A grandmother with a voice note. A cab driver who said, "Orange light on the sign." He closes the file. The appendix will be removed before publication. He prints a copy for his fridge. The old fear is seasonal as rain and as unpunctual. Tonight it arrives with a whisper that has outlived empires. You feel the bell wire hum in the walls of your house. You remember nothing of graphs or stylebooks or ledgers. You remember only a door inside you that, if it slams, will take the hinges with it. The tortoise returns like a teacher who refuses to give up on a student. You do not command it, you coax. "Come out," you say, palm light as a moth below the navel, the greeting, not the guard. You count with the grandmother's voice, because you have borrowed it enough times to keep it. 4 in, 6 out. The breath leaps through your chest like pages turned by a careful librarian. You phone a friend, or you don't. You inventory the room, or you listen to the kettle's gossip. You tap the rail, once, the bus pole, the table edge, the radiator fin, anything that makes a small, decisive sound. You make soup. You read the pinned card you saved by accident into your screenshots folder. You put the ribbon back in the bowl where it belongs, artifact not fetter. If you cry, you let the tears salt the broth. Salt is how bodies remember oceans. Panic has never learned to swim well. And somewhere outside your room, invisible but not imaginary, the harbor hums, chair circles adjusting themselves, radio hosts tuning the key, moderators watching comments accumulate like weather and laying the sandbags of first aid replies, sergeants drilling gentleness, statisticians counting evenings salvaged, midwives writing ginger on shopping lists. The city accompanies you, even if you are alone. This is not metaphor. This is infrastructure. When the bell finally dials itself down and the furniture stops pretending to tremble, you might fall asleep in your chair with the light on. That is permitted. In the morning the city will look ordinary again, the only way safe places ever look. You will go out, and beside the bus stop you will see an old poster, sun-bleached, its corner lifting, the gentle hand. Someone has drawn a tortoise on it in ballpoint pen, very badly, very cheerfully. You will laugh without cutting yourself. You will board the bus. The pole will be there if you need to tap it. You probably won't. The hall is too bright for courage and too echoing for confession. Plastic chairs click like beetle shells as the town arranges itself into neat rows of fidgeting knees. On the low stage, a banner droops, Community Health Night. Someone corrects it with a marker so it reads Community Health Night, comma inserted, mercy inserted. The speaker is not famous. He has a librarian's posture and a radio host's voice. He has come because a whisper has been testing doors again, stealing minutes at bus stops and knots of sleep out of beds. He begins, as such speeches often begin, with a promise to be brief and a story that refuses brevity. In a certain year, he says, soy sauce outsold sense, and strings outsold laughter. A ripple, recognition shaped like a grin, moves through the older rows. He does not scold. He conjures. He draws the map of alarms and the avenues that shorten their route, kettles on, chairs in circles, the forensics that can be taught to a stranger without disturbing their pride. He quotes a headmaster who once taught an assembly to greet their bellies like guests, a sergeant who trained an off-switch, a nurse who said, "Your muscles are loyal. Let us redirect their loyalty." The town listens the way wood listens, quietly, thoroughly, ready to remember. In the back row, a boy who reads too much for his age decides to become a switchman. He does not yet know the word. He only knows that sentences can arrive exactly when crashes are being scheduled and bend the steel. He will start, soon, by changing a headline for the school paper. Later, he will edit a city's tone without being paid for it, which is to say, he will become an adult. Halfway through, the microphone snaps and the hall hears the small hush that separates panic from decision. The speaker lifts his voice only a little, as if not to wake a sleeping house. He teaches the forensics without amplification. 100 chests keep time. The room becomes, very briefly, a lung with windows. By the end, the talk has unlearned itself of swagger. Questions are not questions but offerings. What if the rumor comes by way of a joke? What if my cousin insists on wire? What do we do for the men who sleep alone in a room of 12? The answers are not prescriptions but choreography. We change the joke's key. We substitute ribbon and a story. We invent presents for the lonely. Someone writes these on a paper that will fall behind a cabinet and be found years later, yellowed, still usable. Outside, rain persuades the tin roof to sing. The town leaves in pairs, then in trios, then in small parades of laughter that knows where to stop. If you press your cheek to history's shoulder and listen, you will hear the rustle of pages annotated in hands that never meant to publish. A Ming physician writes, in the margin beside a case of the withdrawn tortoise, the wrist calmed when his uncle entered the room. In a 19th century mission hospital ledger, T effective. Laughter of nurses more so, caution to keep respectful. A 1968 clinic notebook, blue-lined, strings removed after breath exercise. Clothespin confiscated. Patient thanked us for stealing his certainty. A modern GP, sharp shoes, softer eyes, keeps her own marginal gospel. She copies standard protocols in tidy print and then, off to the side, composes a hymn to the gentle hand. If he arrives already braced, praise his vigilance before asking it to rest. If he asks for wire, give ribbon and a story. When possible, refill story before ribbon. If alone, prescribe company measured in cups of tea, not hours. In a drawer, she keeps artifacts that should be ridiculous and are instead holy. A snapped rubber band, relic of a panic redirected. A bottle cap tapped once like a bus pull, proof that small sounds can be anchors. A flyer in 4 languages, manual for midnight short form. Her residents tease her about the drawer until the first night they need it. Then they add to it. She lectures once a month at the university. The syllabus refuses to fit on slides. She tells the students to look up from the pelvis to the room, from the symptom to the sentence. Her exam includes a station in which the correct answer is to pour water, count a breath, and ask a man to name 3 ordinary objects without giggling. Those who roll their eyes at the absurdity of it do poorly in the clinic, and vice versa. The casebooks keep accumulating their tiny revolutions, a ribbon pressed between pages like a leaf, a phrase underlined, misinterpreted alarm, until the ink bleeds like a small bruise, a list of switchmen by first name only. A century from now, some archivist will squint and frown and then smile, recognizing the architecture of a city that kept itself by means too humble for marble. The month begins badly. A video stumbles across feeds showing a young man in a hostile corridor, breath jacked, hands moving into the old guard. A caption, reckless, viral, straps itself to the clip like a bomb vest. In other years this would have been the spark to light a week on fire. But rehearsals matter. The first comment pinned is a card long prepared, the tortoise, the breath count, the greeting not the guard. The second is a link to a city's page, clinics with kettles, open late, chairs in circles. A radio show producer, trained by a diary-keeping psychiatrist decades earlier, shuffles the lineup and gives 10 minutes to a GP who says, human, where others might say, weak. A sub-editor trims the shark fins off 3 headlines in 3 languages. A moderator throttles threads that try to monetize dread. In the dormitory itself, a janitor named Elias does the oldest medicine. He brings 2 mugs of hot water, leans against the cinderblock wall with the manner of a man on break, and counts the breath like he's keeping time for a band. The young man's hands lower, then rise, then lower for good. Someone else laughs, kindly, properly, and the clip ends not with a siren but with tea steam. The storm looks around for tinder and finds everything damp. It tries anyway and dies out like a match in fog. Statisticians will record increased mentions and no corresponding surge in admissions. The city will not pat itself on the back. It will go to work and to bed. Ordinary is how victory wears itself when it is shy. This is where stories usually break into trumpets and vows. Instead, let there be a bench. Not bronze, not granite. Wood that remembers other weather. Sit. Put your palm below your navel, light as gratitude. Name the 3 nearest true things: lamp, curtain, the little scar on the table like a river's question mark. Count the breath the way the city learned to, 4 as you welcome, 6 as you release. Think of the men whose hands became clamps and then, through embarrassment that did not curdle into shame, became hands again for holding bowls, babies, tools, other hands. Think of the nurses who lowered the air with their voices. Think of the switchmen who moved headlines by half a word and trains by many lives. Think of the midwives who considered ginger a pharmacology. Think of the archivists of small mercies, the statisticians of evenings saved. Think of the tortoise that is not cowardice but wisdom, the art of returning. If you require a monument, visit the museum of what did not happen. If you require a liturgy, open the field guide and whisper its verbs. If you require a harbor, remember that any pair of chairs facing the same window at night is one. If you require a myth, here is one that fits in a pocket. Once upon a time, a city taught its heart to count out loud, and the counting made a music fear could not dance to. And if, later, you meet a stranger whose breath has lost its road and whose hands have learned the old choreography, you will know what to do. There is no heroism here, only manners. Pour water. Offer a chair. Lower your voice as if the house were sleeping and you did not want to wake the children. Tap the rail once for both of you, a small, decisive note. Teach the heart to count. Let morning take the watch. The day will come on like an apology accepted. Streets will glitter with rinse light. Soy sauce will go back to being soy sauce. Radios will sell soap for the simple reason that people need soap. A city will do what cities do when they have survived themselves. Buy fruit, forget appointments, forgive, remember, especially remember, the choreography that keeps rumor outside the door with the shoes. And if, tonight or in 100 years, the bell rings again, the hand will find the rail. The rail will answer like metal. The heart will count. A letter goes missing in 1968, lost between a clinic desk drawer and a rainstorm that turned envelopes into soft fish. It was written by a dockworker with careful block letters and too much pride to show his fear to a friend. To the me who sleeps better, it began, which is a way of addressing the future that hopes the mail runs on mercy. He described the queue, the clothespins, the nurse whose voice made the room hold still. He folded into the paper a short red thread, tied once, loosened. He asked the future to answer with proof that the city would forget how to be cruel about this. Decades pass. Paper survives in strange ways, pressed under a book, dried in a ledger, mistaken for a receipt and spared. In 2019, a librarian in a municipal archive finds it stuck to the back of a war bonds poster. She reads the letter at a metal table that rings when you set a cup down too hard. The red thread holds its color like a secret sunset. She writes an answer no postman could deliver, and so she publishes it in the only mailbox that touches every door now. A small essay about the dockworker and the nurse and the thread in the future that did, mostly, learn better manners. At a kitchen table in a high-rise where the elevator is always out of order on Tuesdays, a man who cannot sleep finds the essay at 3:11 a.m. The sentences land like sparrows on the windowsill of his attention. He gets up, boils water, and ties, not his waist, but a loop around the handle of the kettle. "For the museum of what did not happen," he says to no one, and the steam answers like a friendly ghost. The letter has come back, late and right on time. Across town, a teacher prints the essay and tapes it next to the staffroom kettle. The margin fills with annotations as domestic as they are academic. Ginger helps. Use mugs that fit in nervous hands. Do not say "calm down," say, "I can sit with you 10 minutes." Remember the boys without fathers nearby. The tape curls with steam. The paper softens. The doctrine of the gentle hand collects coffee rings and becomes more authoritative with each stain. The dockworker never reads the reply, but the future receives it anyway, which is how most good letters work. He is the kind of scholar who writes thank you notes to archivists and remembers the names of nurses. His subject is not epidemics but aftercare. What people do the morning after panic has tried on its old coat and found it out of fashion. He fills notebooks with the soft machinery of cities. The way a mosque lent a kettle to a temple. The way a temple sent its chairs to a church. The way a church sent its choir's low notes to a radio station that needed a key. He begins, dutifully, with the 17th century treatises, ink that still smells faintly of smoke, metaphors of tortoises and winter hearts, and finds, in margins, the most modern sentence: consolation appears to be the more potent physic. He follows the line through the centuries, Qing physicians recommending company as a medicine, colonial inspectors noting, off the record, that praise unties knots, mission ledgers confessing that tea did what tinctures could not. He footnotes the midwives and the modems with equal reverence. But he knows, as scholars sometimes forget to admit, that there is a part of this doctrine that cannot be taught, only caught. Tone. The nurse's voice that lowers the room by a degree you can feel on your skin. The sergeant's patience that makes a posture worth imitating. The editor's silence where a sensational adjective would have gone, a silence loud as mercy. He writes a chapter titled, "The Acoustic Properties of Reassurance," and it reads like a hymn disguised as a survey. In a seminar room, he tells students to practice saying the same sentence in different keys. "You are here." They laugh, then realize he isn't joking. They try again. The room changes. Someone cries without embarrassment. Someone else laughs with their hands open. He passes around a bowl containing relics collected across years. Ribbon, a snap band, a bottle cap, a photocopied manual for midnight. "Museums are for afterward," he says. But aftercare begins now. His final article refuses the usual ending. Instead of, "More research is needed," it closes with the field guide's verb set in small caps, SID. Warm. Speak. Tap. Loosen. It is rejected by a journal that prefers graphs to kettles. He sends it to a city newsletter where it becomes a staple, clipped to fridges, tucked into clinic drawers, taped above radios. Scholarship wanders home and starts washing dishes. On a Wednesday that smells of wet photocopies and diesel, the old rumor tries the handle again. A post goes live. A clip circulates. Someone somewhere says "Epidemic" with the lazy confidence of a person who has never spent a night on a clinic bench. The siren starts its long inhale. But the city has spent years laying sandbags in the right places. The radio show moves a segment. The host speaks in that warm kitchen register learned from a psychiatrist's diary in the 1980s. The newsroom-style book line, "Lead with antidotes," earns its keep 3 times before lunch. The Kettle Patrol texts the group chat a single emoji and disperses to stairwells and stoops. The chair circles unfold like travel altars. The sergeant, whose hair is now more winter than iron, drills the off switch with new recruits and, because he is sly, teaches them to teach it to others. In a hostile corridor, a janitor named Elias, promoted, respected, still a switchman, meets a wide-eyed boy with the old posture. A hand goes up, greeting not guard, and a breath is counted, 4, 6, and the corridor remembers that it is a corridor, not a cliff. Someone taps a radiator fin. The note is small and absolute. The clip that would have fed the storm dies as it is born, overwritten by tea steam and ordinary conversation about football, rent, and a grandmother who tells better stories than any headline. By midnight, the siren has nothing left to say. The city sleeps, not the sleep of exhaustion, but the sleep of good rehearsal. In the morning, statisticians will file a note. Mentions elevated, admissions steady, chair circle utilization up, Kettle Patrol effect evident. The note will be read, nodded at, and then used to justify the budget of a radio slot, the purchase of sturdier chairs, the order of more kettles. Infrastructure quietly gets another coat of paint. The city doesn't celebrate. It goes to the market. It buys fruit. It forgets appointments. It forgives itself for ever having needed clothespins. Mercy hums like refrigeration. We could end with a monument, but the museum of what did not happen is already full enough. We could end with a moral, but the field guide has been saying it better. SIT. Warm. Speak. Tap. Loosen. Instead, let us end with a body learning, again, always again, the anatomy of staying. Place your palm below your navel, not the guard, the greeting. Name 3 things that are true and near. The lamp's small circle on the table. The curtain's slow breath where the window leaks. The nick in the wood like a river curling around a stone. Count the breath as the grandmother counted, as the nurse counted, as the sergeant counted, as the radio host counted when the microphone failed and the hall became a lung with windows. 4 as you welcome, 6 as you release. Feel how the house listens and decides not to shake. Remember the lineage that carries you to this chair. The Ming physician who wrote that a wrist calmed when an uncle entered the room. The Qing scholar who warned that mockery is a toxin with a long half-life. The colonial inspector who filed a pocket report about praise working faster than liniment. The mission nurse who lowered fever with tone. The editor who cut a word and saved a night. The psychiatrist who learned to sing facts in a key fear could hear. The cartographer of tenderness with her dented poster tube. The statistician who counted evenings salvaged. The janitor who brought 2 mugs. The boy who decided to be a switchman in the back row and grew into a man who was. Remember too, the tortoise that is not cowardice but wisdom, the art of returning. The thread that is no longer needed to bind, kept instead as a relic. The pole you can tap once for certainty. The kettle that gossips like a friendly ancestor. The chair that waits. The harbor that appears when 2 chairs face the same window, and someone counts softly for someone else who has forgotten how. If the bell rings again, as bells do in houses that have known weather, you know the route now. It is not grand. It is a footpath worn by countless ordinary feet, to the kettle, to the chair, to the friend, to the sentence. You are here. Tap the rail once. Let the city accompany you. Let your heart count aloud until fear realizes the dance is over and wanders off in search of a stage that has not learned the steps. Morning will take the watch. Soy sauce will go back to being soy sauce. Radios will sell soap for the simple reason that people need soap. And in the ledger kept by quiet statisticians under the column presence, someone will tick 1 more evening saved. That is how cities live long, by the arithmetic of small mercies, by the doctrine of the gentle hand, by the anatomy of staying. When you rise, leave a note for the next traveler, on a fridge, in a forum, beside a kettle, under a headline. If you are frightened, sit. I will sit too. 4 in, 6 out. Tap once. You are here. It will find its way, late and right on time. And the city, remembering its choreography, will keep fear waiting at the door with the shoes.